Chapter 1. He slid the gold pin across the counter and asked for $10. The pawnbroker looked down at the small metal eagle and went very still. He turned it over once. He read the 4 numbers stamped on the back. Then he closed his hand around the pin so the camera could not see. The young man did not notice. He was already counting the cash in his head. He did not know that the 4 numbers on the back of that pin belonged to a unit that was never supposed to exist. He did not know the old man behind the counter had served with the dead. He thought he was selling a piece of metal for a bus ticket. He was selling the last secret his father carried into the ocean. Why would a son sell his own father for $10? Stay with me, this one matters. Chapter 2. The shop sat on a side street in San Diego, 2 blocks from the freeway. It had bars on the windows and a hand-painted sign that just said LOANS. The young man walked in at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He was 34 years old. His name was Brody Larson. He had not shaved in 3 days. He had a backpack over one shoulder and a thin manila envelope tucked under his arm. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been tired for years and have stopped pretending otherwise. The man behind the counter was 61. His name was Hector Salas. He had been a Navy corpsman for 22 years before he opened the shop. He still kept his hair short. He still stood when a customer walked in. He looked Brody up and down and asked what he had today. Brody said he had a pin. He opened the envelope and tipped it onto the counter. The pin slid out and landed face up on the glass. It was a Navy SEAL Trident. Gold eagle, anchor, pistol, and trident. The metal was scratched in 2 places along the eagle's wing. The pin back was bent at a small angle, like someone had once stepped on it. It was the real thing. Hector had handled 6 of these in his life. He could tell a replica from across the room. Hector did not pick it up right away. He looked at Brody first. He asked where he got it. Brody said it belonged to his father. He said his father was dead. He said he needed $10 for the bus and a sandwich. He said anything more than that would be a gift, and he did not believe in gifts. Hector finally picked up the pin. He turned it over once in his palm. On the back, near the bottom edge of the anchor, 4 numbers were stamped into the gold. Most people would not know what those numbers meant. Most people would think it was a manufacturer code or a serial mark for inventory. Hector knew. The numbers matched a small team that ran out of Coronado from 2007 to 2010. The team had no public name. The team had no public missions. The team had 11 men on its roster. 9 of those men were dead. Hector laid the pin left eye in a tent in 2008. He had been one of the men who carried an empty casket at the funeral in 2009 because there was no body to bury. He had not seen the son in over 20 years. The last time he had seen Brody in person, the boy was 12 years old and had a chipped front tooth from a skateboard accident. He looked at Brody again. He saw the chipped tooth. It was still there. The man had the same eyes as the boy. The same eyes as the father. Hector reached under the counter and pulled out a small notepad. He wrote down a name and a phone number on the top page. He told Brody to sit on the bench by the window. He told him there would be money in his hand inside of 5 minutes, but he wanted to make one call first. Brody shrugged. He sat down on the bench. He watched the cars roll past on the avenue and did not ask any questions. Hector walked into the back room and closed the door behind him. He did not call the police. He did not call the bank. He picked up his old desk phone and dialed a number he had not used in 2 years. The man who answered the phone lived in Virginia. He had been the master chief of the team in 2009. His name was Roy Cobb. Hector said 4 words into the receiver. He said the pin came back. Then he read the 4 numbers stamped on the metal out loud. Roy was quiet on the other end for 10 full seconds. Then Roy said, "Hold him there." Roy said, "Do not let that boy walk out of your shop." Hector hung up. He walked back to the counter. He counted out $50 in 20s and a 10 and slid it across the glass. He told Brody it was a loan against the pin, 60-day hold, full ticket. He told him to take the money and come back tomorrow at noon. He said there was someone who wanted to meet him. Brody asked who. Hector said an old friend of your father's. Brody almost laughed at the word friend. He said his father did not have friends. Not by the end of it. Not as far as he had ever been told. Hector did not argue. He slid the ticket across the glass. Brody took it. Brody walked out the door and let it close behind him. The bell on the door rang once. Hector stood there for another minute with his hand still on the counter, looking at the place on the glass where the pin had been. Chapter 3. Brody took the $50 and walked out into the afternoon. He did not go to a bus station. He went to a diner on the corner and ordered eggs and toast and a cup of black coffee. He sat in the booth by the window. He ate slowly. He had not eaten a real meal in 4 days. He watched the sun drop behind the buildings on the west side of the avenue. He thought about his mother. His mother had died in February. She was 62 years old. The cancer took 8 months from first diagnosis to the last morning. At the end, she could not speak above a whisper. The last full sentence she said to him was about a folder. She said there was a folder in the closet behind the winter coats. She said, "Do not open it until you have nothing left." Then she closed her eyes and did not open them again. Brody had opened the folder 3 weeks ago. Inside were 37 letters his mother had sent over 15 years. Letters to the Navy. Letters to senators. Letters to a reporter at the Washington Post. Letters to a veterans advocacy office in Norfolk. Every letter asked the same question. What happened on the night of October 14, 2009? Every letter came back with the same answer. There was no operation on that date. There was no record of Chief Larson being deployed in that window. There was a sealed file, and the file would remain sealed. The last letter in the folder was not from his mother. It was from an admiral. It was dated 2011. It told her to stop writing. It told her that further inquiries would result in the loss of her widow's benefits. It told her that her husband had served with honor in a training accident off the California coast, and that was the only story she would ever receive. His mother had kept paying the bills. She had kept the Trident in a drawer, wrapped in a clean white cloth. She had told Brody at 16 that his father was a hero, and at 17 that his father had walked out on them. Both things had been ways of keeping him safe. Both things had been lies in the shape of love. Brody had left home at 18. He had not gone to college. He had bounced through carpentry, then warehouse work, then a long bad year on the Oregon coast he did not like to talk about. He had not spoken to his mother for the last 6 years of her life. He learned about her death from a hospital social worker who tracked him down through a tax form. He had not gone to the funeral. He had not been able to make himself walk into the church. He had inherited a small house in Chula Vista with a second mortgage on it. He had inherited a 1998 Toyota with a bad transmission. He had inherited the folder, the Trident, and a debt to a man named Hector he did not yet know he owed. He had thought about throwing the folder in the trash the first time he opened it. He had thought about burning the Trident in the backyard. He had done neither thing. Something in his mother's handwriting on the front of the folder had stopped him. She had written one word in pencil. The word was proof. She had underlined it 3 times. A woman who has nothing left to win does not write a word like that in pencil 3 weeks before she dies. A woman like that writes that word because she is trusting someone to finish the job. He had not wanted to be that someone. He had wanted to be a man with no last name. He had wanted to be a man who could disappear into Phoenix or Tucson, or any city far enough from a coastline that no one would ever ask him about a father he did not remember well enough to defend. But he had carried the folder out to the car anyway. He had carried the Trident in a sock. He had driven the 200 miles down to San Diego with both items on the passenger seat and a half-empty tank of gas, telling himself the whole way that he was only doing this to pay for the bus to somewhere else. He finished his eggs. The sun was gone now. The streetlights were on. He paid with one of the 20s and walked outside. The air was cool. He could smell the ocean 2 miles west. He thought about the way the pawnbroker had looked at the pin. He thought about the 4 numbers on the back. He had never noticed them. He pulled the small ticket from his pocket and read the loan slip. The shop opened at 9 in the morning. He was supposed to come back at noon. He did not know what tomorrow at noon was going to be. He told himself it would be one more man asking one more question he could not answer. He told himself he would take the bus to Phoenix in the morning and forget the Trident and forget the folder and forget the name Larson for good. He walked back toward the motel by the freeway. He passed a gas station. He passed a closed flower shop. He passed a row of palm trees that did not move because there was no wind. The traffic on the freeway had thinned out. The neon sign on the motel buzzed in a steady low tone. He climbed the stairs to his room and let himself in. The room was $24 a night. The bedspread was the color of weak tea. The carpet smelled like other people's cigarettes. He sat on the edge of the bed and untied his boots. He drank a glass of water from the bathroom tap. He took the loan slip out of his pocket and laid it on the nightstand. He felt for the first time in years that no one in the world was looking for him. He felt almost peaceful. He told himself this was the worst day behind him. He told himself it was over. He was wrong about every part of that. He fell asleep in his clothes by 10. The black sedan was already on its way down the coast. Chapter 4. At 7 the next morning, a black sedan parked across the street from the motel. 2 men were already inside the diner, on the corner drinking coffee. A third man had checked into the room, next door to Brody's at 6:30. By the time Brody came out of the bathroom and looked through the curtain, the day he thought was going to be a bus ride to Phoenix had already turned into something else entirely. It started with a knock. A soft one. 3 taps and then a pause, and then one more tap. Brody opened the door 6 inches with the chain still on. A small woman in a gray jacket was standing there, with a press badge clipped to her collar. She said her name was Anna Reyes. She said she had flown in on the red eye from Dulles. She said she had been waiting 15 years to meet him. She asked if he had 90 seconds. Brody almost closed the door on her. Something in her face stopped him. She did not look excited. She did not look like a reporter chasing a story. She looked the way doctors look when they are about to say the word cancer to someone who has not heard it yet. She said his father's pin had come back into the world last night. She said 3 retired chiefs had been on the phone since midnight. She said if he came with her right now to a coffee shop 1 mile away, he would understand by the end of 1 cup why his mother had spent 15 years writing letters no one ever answered. He thought about closing the door anyway. He thought about the bus to Phoenix. Then he thought about the last whisper from his mother about the folder in the closet. He picked up his jacket. He took off the chain. He followed her down the stairs and into the parking lot. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. She had a rental car waiting. They drove 1 mile. They did not speak. The coffee shop was on a quiet block with a bakery on one side and a barber shop on the other. She held the door open for him. The bell rang as they walked in. 4 men were already sitting at a long table in the back. 3 of them were older. Mid-60s. Hard shoulders, soft eyes, the kind of men who never quite put the uniform down even after 20 years of wearing other clothes. The fourth man at the table was Hector. He stood up when Brody walked in. He pulled out a chair next to him. He nodded to the man at the head of the table. The man at the head introduced himself as Roy Cobb. He said he had been Master Chief of his father's team. He said the team was real. He said the mission on October 14, 2009 was real. He said there were 5 men on the boat that night, and only 2 came back to the boat at the end. His father had not been one of the 2. His father had stayed behind on a rock outcrop above a Pakistani fishing village, so the other 4 could move down the slope. He had held a position for 40 minutes with 1 rifle, 3 magazines, and a broken radio. He had killed 11 men. The 4 who escaped owed him the rest of their lives. Roy said the mission had been off books. Roy said the mission had also been illegal. The team had crossed a border they were not authorized to cross to recover an asset who turned out not to be there at all. 3 weeks after the firefight, an admiral sitting in an office in Washington decided that the cleanest way to make a mistake disappear was to make the men who died on the mistake disappear too. The bodies were never recovered. The widows were told their husbands died in a training accident off Catalina Island. The families who asked too many questions were quietly pushed off base housing, off the medical rolls, and off the pension lists one by one. Brody asked why now. Roy said because the admiral was up for a 4th star next month. Roy said because Anna Reyes had been building this story for 11 years, and she was missing one thing. She was missing a son. She was missing a face the public could look at. Brody asked what they wanted from him. Roy slid the gold pin across the table. He said, "Keep it." He said, "Wear it on the inside of your jacket if you have to." He said, "Come to Washington in 9 days and sit in a room with 3 senators and tell them what your mother spent her life trying to say." He said your father held a rock for 40 minutes so 4 men could go home to their wives. The least the country can do is say his name out loud one time in a room with a microphone. Brody did not say anything. He looked at the pin. The 4 numbers on the back were facing up. Roy let the silence sit there for a long minute. Then he reached into a leather case beside his chair and pulled out a thin paper file. He laid it on the table next to the pin. He said this was the after-action report. He said it was unofficial. He said 3 of the men at this table had each kept a copy in a safe for 15 years, waiting for a day exactly like this one. He said Brody did not have to read it now. He said Brody did not have to read it ever if he did not want to. But he said if Brody was going to stand up in Washington and put his father's name on the record, he should at least know what his father had done in the last 40 minutes of his life. Brody opened the file. There were 9 pages. He read the first paragraph. Then he closed the file and put his hand on top of it and did not move for almost a minute. The 4 men in the room watched him without speaking. Hector reached across the table and put one hand on Brody's wrist. He left it there until Brody looked up. Chapter 5. He went home that night to the small house in Chula Vista. The second mortgage paperwork was still on the kitchen table where his mother had left it. The folder was still in the closet behind the winter coats. He pulled it down. He carried it into the living room. He sat on the floor with his back against the couch and read every letter again. This time he read them differently. He saw the dates. He saw how his mother had spaced them. He saw she had written one every 6 months for 15 years, like a woman placing stones along a path so someone could follow her later when she was no longer able to walk it herself. He saw the careful handwriting at the beginning and the shakier handwriting near the end. He saw that the last 3 letters had been written from a hospital bed in pencil. He found a letter at the bottom of the stack that was not addressed to the Navy. It was addressed to him. It was sealed. He had missed it the first time. He turned it over in his hands twice. Then he opened it. His mother had written it in October, 4 months before she died. She knew she was dying when she wrote it. She said she had stopped being angry at the Navy a long time ago. She said she had stayed angry at him longer than she meant to. She said she had been wrong to push him out of the truth when he was 16. She had thought silence would protect him. She had only made him an orphan to a man who had not abandoned anyone. She said the pin in the drawer was not for him to wear. She said it was for him to carry until he met the right person. She said when he met the right person, he would know without being told, and on that day he was allowed to put the pin down. She said she did not know if that day would come in his lifetime. She said she hoped it would come the day after she died, because she had earned the right to watch it from somewhere quieter than this kitchen. He put the letter down on the floor. He sat there for a long time. He did not cry exactly. Something else happened. The shape of his whole life rearranged itself one quiet inch. The man he had been angry at for 16 years was not the man who had left him. The man who had left him had been a story his mother told to keep him from going looking too soon. The truth had been waiting in a sealed file in a building 3,000 miles away. He called Roy in the morning. He said he would go to Washington. He said he would tell the story. He asked one question. He asked if there was any chance at all, that his father's body could come home. Roy was quiet on the other end. Roy said the rock was still where it had always been. Roy said 2 of the men who walked away from that rock had been waiting 15 years for someone to ask that question with the authority to send a recovery team in. Roy said if Brody sat in that hearing room next week and used his father's name in front of the right cameras, the Navy would not have a choice anymore. Brody packed a small bag that afternoon. He took the folder. He took the pin. He took a photograph of his mother at 24, standing on a pier in Coronado holding a baby. He took nothing else from the house. He locked the door and left the key under the mat for a neighbor he had not yet met. That night he could not sleep. He sat in the kitchen with the lamp on low. He read the 9-page file Roy had given him twice through. He read about a Zodiac boat dropped 2 miles off a stretch of coast. He read about a climb up a slope of loose rock in the dark. He read about a village that should not have known the team was coming, and somehow had known anyway. He read about a 5th man on the team who had been hit in the leg in the first 30 seconds. He read about his father carrying that 5th man back up the slope on his own shoulders and laying him down behind a wall of stones and telling him to keep breathing. The 5th man had been Roy. Roy had walked off that rock because his father had carried him. He had not put that part in the file. The other 3 men in the coffee shop had told Brody later, in a parking lot, while Roy stood 20 feet away pretending to look at his phone. Hector drove him to the airport on Tuesday morning. They did not say much in the car. The radio played a country station at low volume. At the curb, Hector reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded flag. He said he had carried it home from the funeral in 2009 because the family had not wanted it that day. He said it had been in his safe for 15 years. He said it belonged to Brody now. He said, do not open it on the plane. Open it in the room when they ask you to speak. Brody took the flag. He put it in his bag. He shook the old man's hand. He walked into the terminal. He did not look back, because he knew if he looked back he would not get on the plane. Chapter 6. The room in the Hart Senate office building was smaller than he expected. Wood paneling on 3 walls. A long table with 5 microphones along the front. 3 senators on a raised bench. 2 staff members at a side desk. Anna Reyes was in the 3rd row with a notepad on her knee. Roy Cobb and 2 other retired chiefs sat behind Brody in their dress uniforms. The 4 men his father had saved on that rock were in the 2nd row. He had met them the night before at a hotel restaurant. They had all hugged him. None of them had been able to speak more than a few sentences without stopping. Across the aisle sat the Admiral. He was 73 now. White hair, square jaw, 2 stars on each shoulder. He did not look at Brody. He looked at the table in front of him. The senator in the middle asked Brody to state his name and his connection to the matter under review. Brody leaned toward the microphone. He said his name. He said he was the son of Chief Petty Officer Daniel Larson. He said he was here because his mother had written 37 letters over 15 years, and received 0 answers. He said he was here because his father had been called a training accident for 15 years, and he was not a training accident. He opened his bag. He took out the folded flag Hector had given him at the curb in San Diego. He laid it on the table in front of him. He took out the gold pin. He laid it next to the flag. He said, "This pin came back to me last week through a pawn shop window." He said, "I am the son who sold it for $10 because I did not know what it was." He said the man who gave me $10 knew exactly what it was, because he had served with my father, and because the United States Navy had spent 15 years pretending my father had never served at all. The room was very quiet. The Admiral still did not look up. Brody read 3 of his mother's letters into the record. He read the names of the 4 men his father had saved one by one. He asked formally for a recovery operation to be authorized to bring his father home from a rock above a fishing village whose coordinates were in a sealed file in a building 8 blocks away. The senator in the middle asked the Admiral to respond. The Admiral stood up. He was slower than he meant to be. He said he would not contest the testimony. He said he had given the order in 2009 to bury the operation, and he had given the orders after that to bury the families. He said he had told himself for 15 years that he had done it to protect the service. He said he had been lying to himself the whole time. He apologized to Brody. He apologized to the 4 men in the second row. He apologized by name to a woman who had died 3 months earlier and could not hear him. He sat back down. He did not look proud. He looked finished. The recovery operation was authorized 11 days later. A team of 6 went in by helicopter and came out at dawn with a sealed transport case. The case landed at Dover Air Force Base on a Tuesday morning in light rain. Brody was there. Hector flew out for it. The 4 men were there in their dress whites. Anna Reyes wrote a story that ran on the front page of the Washington Post the following Sunday. The Admiral's 4th star was withdrawn that same week. Chief Daniel Larson was buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery on the cliff above the Pacific on a clear afternoon in June. The pin was on the casket. The folded flag from Hector's safe was handed to Brody at the end of the service by a young sailor who had not yet been born when his father died. Brody drove home that night to the small house in Chula Vista. He put the flag on the mantle. He set the pin on top of the flag. He stood in the kitchen and read his mother's last letter to him one more time. He read the line where she said he was allowed to put the pin down on the day he met the right person. He understood now who the right person was. It was not Hector. It was not Roy. It was not any of the 4 men on the rock. It was the boy he had been at 16, sitting at the kitchen table with a mother who could not yet tell him the truth. He had finally met that boy. He had finally told him everything. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He slept for the first time in his whole life, like a son who knew his father's name.